You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is January 24th of 2024. So welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. Today, however, we're going to talk about censorship because it seems like the last 10 years have just been huge on our ideas of what's been going on with censorship. And the topics we're going to talk about sort of martyrs in that war against censorship, some past and some that are going on right now. We're going to talk about the media censoring Trump's victory speech in Iowa. And in our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, we're going to remember fondly the demise of what almost was a ministry of truth in this country. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. And no Screaming Eagle tonight. Tonight, in our right-hand corner, our invisible hand, James Just, has become very visible.
Yes, now you have a screaming, I don't know, invisible hand. I guess I don't know. Make that
there you go. Our screaming invisible hand of liberty.
Our screaming invisible hand is very visible tonight.
There you go. So let's start by jumping right in with a quote that sort of sets the stage for the show. So again, we're going to talk a lot about censorship tonight, and so I thought it would be appropriate to talk about one of the great voices in our history of talking about what happens when the government gets too much control over our speech. And so, James, maybe you could bring up the visual here. So we have a quote from. So this is George Orwell. In case you're not familiar, you should be if you're watching the show. But if you're not familiar with it, he was the author of 1984 and Animal Farm, along with a lot of other articles and stories as well. Those ones particularly stand out. But what he said in this quote I thought was particularly appropriate for this show. And he says, "In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." This one kind of also reminds me a little bit of the Ron Paul quote I hear often, and maybe it sort of overlays with this, but it says, truth is treason in the empire of lies. That's it. But anyways, I mean, it feels like telling the truth nowadays gets you censored, right? I mean, there's all these fact checkers and other things out there. But essentially, if you're not going along with whatever the government narrative is, that's going to get you censored. And in some cases, in some countries, even outside of this one, Western countries, might even get you thrown in jail. So anyways, you guys have some thoughts on Orwell and this particular quote?
James, since you're visible tonight, you want to go?
Well, the only thing I can really think of at the moment, because I'm all unprepared for this today, is that how it's very similar. It's very similar to those who know history are doomed to sit by and watch everybody else repeat it. It's kind of this. It's a similar line where, if you're a truth teller, you spend a lot of time frustrated that so much of the world doesn't see, if anything else, more perspectives than they do. It's I don't know. This is what happens when you don't have any time to prepare for the show. You don't have anything for me, Leon. Didn't give me time to think.
What is really scary about what's going on here, excuse me, is how many Americans, how many of our fellow citizens is cheering this thing on, clapping when censorship is in our very eyes. You see the left-wing media thinking it's so wonderful to stop people from speaking during the COVID pandemic, to stop people from speaking about certain ethnic groups, to stop people from speaking just because they disagree with their point of view. This is a very dangerous thing. And I mean, George Orwell is absolutely correct, and the Rand Paul quote you gave, Jason, is also very pertinent. That telling the truth now have become like a crime, and your truth, your words must now be approved by someone, apparently, some invisible person, I guess, who is know all and see all. Maybe the gods of the left, who believe that only their speech is good speech. This, though, is a dangerous path that we are walking, where one of the founding pillars of this great land of ours is under attack.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Did Leon just get censored?
Yeah, Leon got censored. Well, that brings up a point, though. Actually, it's how in the modern world, we have a lot of people who get to speak my truth, right? They get their truth, but nobody else gets their truth. Some people get to speak the truth, even if it's a perspective, and other people can't actually speak the truth, even if it's the actual truth. We live in strange times, right? May you live in interesting times is a curse that we are currently living, I think, is a.
Yes. Yeah. No. Yeah. This is definitely scary times right now. I mean, it just seems like one thing after another. It seems to be challenging. Just seems to be challenging our concepts of what is normal anymore. What we can expect. I mean, we see just crazy activity around our borders, around even being able to identify what a woman is. I mean, we have a president who says he's chosen somebody specifically because they're a woman, and then that person won't define what a woman is. I mean, that's literally, the kind of times we're living in. It seems like one thing after another, it just seems to get more bizarre. So, yeah.
Well, if you can circumvent the truth, if you can force people to speak lies, you can force people to live a lie, right? That's kind of the theory. And, more and more people are willing to speak something they find not to be true. And I actually find that more dangerous than, this people are saying things that they know not to be true in their heart, that they don't believe. And there's always some of that, you go along to get along, but it seems different now, right? It seems a little different now.
Yeah. Well, let me take us into our first story, and I'm not sure. Hopefully, we'll get Leon back here, but our first story has to do with essentially, the martyrs of censorship that are going on right now. And recently, Tucker Carlson did an interview, or not an interview, rather. It was sort of a mix of an interview and a news story, but he did a story on a guy named Gonzalo Lira. And so this guy was an expat living in Ukraine, and he was essentially putting out his own blog, video blog, I believe, where he was just saying what he saw inside the country. And so there was a lot of people saying, hey, this is pro-Putin stuff. This is pro-Russia stuff. And of course, Tucker gets accused of being pro-Putin a lot too. But the crazy thing was, though, that, we are backing that country. We have given them hundreds of billions of dollars. And, this is a guy who was essentially saying things that weren't flattering about Ukraine, and he was censored for it. So, so this is, somebody who just died in a Ukrainian jail for essentially saying things that their administration did not want to hear. And there's a few stories about it. But before we get into the stories, maybe we can pull up the video clip. So let's hear video clip 1, just so we can kind of hear what some of the stuff was that this Gonzalo Lira was saying about Ukraine and their leaders. And by the way, this was taken on a clip from Tucker Carlson's show, just so you know where it came from.
The Russian economy is sailing on, sailing on. European economy, people are starting to die of hypothermia in the UK because they don't have access to the cheap energy of Russia from before. See? And so everything that the West has thrown at the Russians has boomeranged right back at them. And so now they're panicking, and they're trying to figure out a way out of this situation. And they figure that if they throw more tanks, it'll help. It won't help. The Ukrainians, rather, they had something like 2,000 tanks before the start of this conflict. You think a couple of hundred now is going to help? I mean, why are they asking them? Because those 2,000 tanks are gone. That's basic, And so what, a couple of hundred, maybe 300 tanks, is that going to change the outcome of the conflict? No, it won't. The Russians are just going to destroy them. in the West, all of the propaganda has said that Zelensky's a hero, a Winston Churchill figure, and the Kiev regime are just angels and stuff like that. No, they're bloodthirsty murderers.
So there you have. Oh, sorry. Were you just saying something?
It's hard to take him seriously
Yeah.
when he says when his point was that the Russian economy is sailing on and on. It's actually, if you're going to point out that the European economy is struggling because of the access because of the lack of access to cheap Russian energy, that's fine. It's a legitimate point. But the Russian economy is having even more struggles in deeper parts of the economy, and he just wants to brush that over. So I'm not going to say it's Russian propaganda, but it is a very narrow worldview, right? He's not the truth sayer that he's claiming to be. He's a very worldview. And there are no human rights in a war zone. That is the reality of wars. There's no such thing as human rights in a war. It's never existed in human history. It's not going to exist now.
Well, except for the fact that though he is an American citizen and we are funding a country that is literally taking away his right to speak, which is kind of disturbing, because if we can't get a narrative other than the government narrative, then that's a little bit troubling. But before we get to any more on this, let's watch the second video clip, because this shows you. So that's what got him in trouble. Essentially, what you saw. That's in it. What I was showing to wasn't to say whether he was correct or incorrect.
Yeah,
it was just to say this was his speech essentially on what's going on. This was his opinion, and it was essentially being silenced. So in the second clip, he talks about being arrested and sort of what his situation was before he met his ultimate end. So can we bring up this second clip?
I will definitely be sent to a prison labor camp where I will most certainly die. And so I decided that the smart thing was take my chances in terms of getting across the border. Right now, I'm maybe 5 kilometers away from the border with Hungary. Over the last 2 days, I rode my bike just about 1,300 kilometers from Kharkov all the way here to the border. And my intention is to cross the border, get to Hungary, and in Hungary, I'm going to ask for political asylum. So either I will cross the border into Hungary in the next couple of hours, or I will be arrested again, and God knows what will happen to me.
He never made it.
So that's essentially what happened. What Tucker Carlson was saying is that I guess he tried to cross the border and he was rearrested, and then he died in one of these Ukrainian prisons, I guess. And so this is one of the things too I was trying to that James is kind of alluding to, the fact that there's a lot of media is referring to him as a Russian propagandist. Tucker was kind of more referring to him more like maybe a truth teller. So obviously saying that the Russian economy is great does sound like a stretch, but the bottom line is, are we free to say what our opinions are about things? Are we only free to have the government narrative? But yeah, these different articles, Jen, maybe you could bring up the visual here, but these different articles here all talk about him. Pro-Russian blogger Gonzalo Lira allegedly dies in Ukrainian detention center. Allegedly. Well, we know he's dead. It's not alleged. An American filmmaker arrested and jailed for spreading pro-Russian propaganda dies in Ukrainian prison. So even Fox is, listing him as a pro-Russian propaganda, or at least that's what he was jailed for anyways. Yeah. So, and of course, Tucker's piece, if you want to go watch the entire piece, is over there. So anyway, but this does seem to, I don't know if you guys want to talk about this a little more. I did want to talk about this though.
I want to say one thing about this. I really want to say one thing about this, that, this is a tragic situation, obviously. Okay. And Jason, you alluded to the point that, well, we have supported Ukraine to the tune of, I don't know, 100, maybe $120 million
No, billion.
billion,
Not billion.
billion with a B.
Yeah.
To fight the Russians, and I guess I mean there's a lot of opposition against that, and some of the opposition obviously is right here on this show. But the thing is, though, as tragic as this situation is, I think too often we forget that American citizens do not take the U.S. Constitution with them when they go abroad. They're doing so at their own risk. And I mean, I really feel for this guy. It's very tragic. I mean, it looks like he's dead now. I mean, you say we can't say allegedly. He's dead now. It's a very tragic situation. But we have no constitutional protection when we end up, and James is right, in a war zone, you have none. And you're overseas, you don't have the U.S. Constitution with you. You took your chance and you pay a horrible price for it. I am very sorry.
Yeah, and the humane thing for Ukraine would have been to deport him the first time, right? They arrested him, they just kick him out the country, back to California, your sorry butt goes, right? That's what the solution should have been. But for whatever reason, they didn't do that. Our government didn't force them to do that, right? Despite us giving billions of dollars, they'll trade for a basketball player with the Russians, but they're not going to trade for a communist journalist to get out of Ukraine. It's silly to go into a war zone and think you have human rights. It's just silly. But at the same time, the humane thing to do would have been to deport him and send him back home. That would have been the right thing to do.
It is true. The humane thing would have been to do that. But how the Ukrainian government saw this man is germane here. They were looking at him not as, he's just some guy silently promoting Russian propaganda. They probably were looking at him as some sort of spy or engaged in some sort of treasonous activity within their borders, and they acted accordingly. I'm not supporting Ukraine in this. I'm just simply saying whether we believe it's human rights, we believe this involves human rights, or we believe that he has rights as a U.S. citizen. Whatever you believe about this situation, you voluntarily chose to do this in a place that does not have the protections that we are supposed to have here in the United States. It's an unfortunate and tragic situation.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, Leon, so you had mentioned that before, and that's one of the things I wanted to push back on just a little bit, because if you recall, that basketball player, I can't remember her name, but she went into Russia, essentially.
Brittany Grimes, yes.
Yeah, and she went into Russia, and she was essentially took vape material with her, which wasn't legal there. So there was somebody who went in and look at the overwhelming extent that the Biden administration went to get her out of there. And somebody with supposedly no constitutional protections, and she was simply violating their laws for personal reasons. This guy was literally giving us information about what's happening over there. And I mean, that's the whole purpose of the First Amendment, right? Is to have that ability to hear a different narrative than what the government wants us to hear. And because our government didn't want us to hear that narrative either, if you listen to the rest of the Tucker interview, he interviews the guy's father, and it took them forever to come visit this guy when he was in jail. And apparently he had an attorney that didn't speak English, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. So, this is one of those things where I think, at the very least, certainly I agree with you guys that, hey, we shouldn't be so naive as to go to other places and assume we have all the protections we have here. But my goodness, we should at least expect our government to stand behind our rights, at least protest that or anything. They just let this guy die over there because he wasn't mouthing the narrative of our government. So that's disturbing, to say the least.
Yes, it's a valid point, Jason, but I will defend myself here just a little bit. I think when Brittany Grimes, I think her name was released from prison, there was also another guy who was in prison. I believe he was a CIA agent or somebody in government thing at the time. And I think he's still in prison, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And the Biden administration didn't negotiate for him, but they were negotiating to get Brittany Grimes out of Russia.
And it coincided with Pride Day, I believe it was. And of course, she met all of their identity criteria, so they had a big celebration when they brought her back. But this other guy was literally saying that he had been detained for reasons where they suspected him of being a spy, and he claimed he wasn't. Which to me seems pretty horrifying.
Yeah, of course. And of course, in the case of Brittany, of course, she black, lesbian, and whatever else, and female, obviously. So all of those things intersected to make her special. But in that talk about again, what made this woman special compared to that guy who was in prison at the time? Okay, but we have to remember she did break the law. So, I mean, hey, I don't care about Russian law. I don't want to be in that country and that kind of stuff. But if you voluntarily choose to go there, that's the problems you're going to face.
Do you want to know the real difference that makes me sad, Leon? Is the real difference was media outrage. The media was outraged that she was in jail. The media was not outraged that this guy was in jail.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
But which gets back to some of the things that we're talking about here, is the media and pushing the government narrative and censorship in along the way. Now, they didn't want to talk about the guy who was in prison, the white male, who of course is, I mean, you know, the white male these days are a bunch of devils, according to the media. So they didn't want to talk about that. So that was taken off of their editorials and taken off of their news and all that kind of stuff. Essentially censored. But yet they gave us the government narrative. Oh, poor Brittany. She just did a little bit, okay, she misunderstood the law, blah, 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 all this other BS. And of course, the Biden administration responded to that. Of course, let's just make sure we get Brittany home. Okay. But this, you're right. You're right. These people, the media, is one of the biggest among the censors we have in the United States. Now, that's a very ironic thing to be saying. They are the biggest among the censors in the United States. We had federal officers working at Twitter at one time, occupying office space at Twitter. They weren't there to have coffee and to shoot the breeze.
Yeah.
What the hell do you think they were doing there? So yeah, it's a real problem. When you have media spouting the government narrative, of course we are becoming into a fascist state.
Yeah, and to just jump in. And to clarify what Leon is saying here, I mean, government agencies were essentially sending communications to social media companies, and this all came out in the Twitter files recently. And we'll talk briefly about that in the Knucklehead Noise Patrol. But the issue was that they were asking for specific censoring to occur of private citizens. And that is, once again, the state reaching in and trying to censor private citizens. But, one of the things I wanted to bring up with this story too, and granted, we don't know for sure, how relevant what Gonzalo Lira was doing as far as, was he giving us the straight scoop, or was it, maybe a sort of a propagandized story? But, the issue of being able to hear these things and government shutting it down is the big issue. And where this can really go into play is we've seen this happen a whole bunch of times recently and over the last 10 years. And so one of the stories I wanted to give you a little update on is what's happening with Edward Snowden. And so, James, maybe you could bring up that visual real quick. So, Edward Snowden was arrested by our government. Well, no, he wasn't. They tried to arrest him rather.
No, he
was a contractor for. So he was hired as an analyst for a contractor of our intelligence agencies. I believe the NSA.
It was the National Security Agency.
Yeah. And so he was an analyst, and he saw that what the government claimed it was doing was not actually what it was doing, what they claimed to the public. And so there was a video that had Eric Clapper, who was the director of the National Intelligence Service, and he had said when he had been grilled in front of Congress, the whole point of congressional testimony is so that the people can find out what some of these agencies are doing. And they asked him point blank, are you spying on the American people? And here was his answer. This is KOL 4, so we have to jump one on this since we're doing a slightly different order here.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
We have evidence, new evidence, of the Obama administration's unprecedented security efforts. The National Security Agency is keeping track of the telephone records of millions of Americans.
Britain's Guardian newspaper obtained a copy of a secret court order authorizing the data collection. The document shows the information is being collected indiscriminately and in bulk.
And it was Edward Snowden who brought that information out to the public. And what happened to him? He got chased by our government. He released it to Glenn Greenwald and I believe the Guardian, overseas in Hong Kong. And then he wound up having to run from there to eventually an airport in Russia, where he wound up essentially being in limbo for quite a few years there, and eventually he was given Russian citizenship not too long ago. And the main reason he says he took that was because it allowed him travel privileges and his family travel privileges by him being a citizen there, so that he could actually visit with his family and have them come live with him. So that was a big issue there. But I mean, the idea that, this man, and James, can you bring up the visual real quick of the story? 10 years. This is an absolute shame of our country. This guy, what did he do? He exposed the corruption at the top of the government lying to the people in front of Congress. And who's the one who's punished? That Clapper guy, he's actually got news contracts. He's a commentator on CNN and other places. Mm-hmm. Edward Snowden is in exile. I mean, he couldn't even see his family for quite a while. This is just insane. Anyways, what do you guys want to jump in on this story?
Well, all I got to say is that the agents of the government can violate the Constitution with no consequences, but we can't park poorly without paying a price. And I just, there's something severely wrong with that in a nation of that supposed laws. And those laws are supposed to apply to agents of the government as much and as well as the average citizen. And it's no longer happening.
And Leon, before you jump in, let me say to our public access crowd, we got a split for now, but you can catch the rest of this show online. Check us out on Rumble, YouTube, Spotify, and Facebook, and you can come in and hear the rest of this conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about Assange and Jay Bhattacharya as well, and some of the censorship that has been done on them. And but anyways, back to the show. So Leon, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, to me, Edward Snowden presents some dilemma, okay? Because it is true that we believe, we as liberty-minded people believe in the rule of law, right? And Edward Snowden really broke the law to release this information to the public. Now, I think what he did was a moral thing to do, okay? But it certainly was not a legal thing to do. So then the question becomes, to me, if it's moral for him to do it, but illegal for him to do it, should he ever be prosecuted for it? Now, there's no doubt James Carter should have been prosecuted a long time for that lie he told in front of Congress. There's no doubt about that. But when you look at Snowden, though, I don't think it's as cut and dry as to whether or not he should be prosecuted, because he did break the law. There's no doubt about that. But he did something that was the morally right thing to do. So I don't know where you draw the lines here. Where you draw the lines.
Whistleblower protections. When you break a law to expose a bigger law broken, right? This happens all the time. If you're a petty criminal, you get away with your petty crime if you can get up a big time drug dealer or a murderer, right? This happens all the time. And so it's the same principle.
Well, no, James, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if there's whistleblower protections when you're dealing with classified information. And the information was classified. It was highly sensitive. It was whatever you want to call it. But Edward Snowden, I don't know if there's whistleblower protection for somebody who releases classified information.
But here's
I'll have
the
to
thing,
check on that to be
then
sure.
we'll never, ever know if the government is breaking the law, because everything will just be classified, and anybody who ever even talks about it will now be a criminal.
Well, this is where the morality of the situation comes into play, right? Because during the Nixon administration, we had what was the guy name? The psychiatrist who released the information. What was his name? The Daniel Ellsberg or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So actually, he was prosecuted, but I think he got away. Right? He was prosecuted, but he got away. Wasn't Daniel Ellsberg prosecuted for the release of?
Well, I don't know, but just jump into the point.
Yeah. Okay. But the point is, but the point is, where do we draw this line? Okay, where do we draw this line in terms of morality and legality? So I don't know where we do that, because sure, I totally agree with Snowden. From a moral point of view, I have to agree with him, because I don't want the government spying on us without warrants or without any purpose or anything like that. They're just spying on us just because they damn well think it's the right thing to do. I don't want a government that does that. I don't want to live in China or Russia. But if you have people breaking the law to do the morally right thing, though, where do you draw that line? I don't know.
Yeah, and just to give another example, suppose it's a runaway slave, and you go back a couple hundred years and you're helping a runaway slave. Well, technically, you're breaking the law. Should that person be, I would think most of us would hope that the government isn't going to prosecute that person. But back then, I'm sure there would have been some people arguing that the person should have been prosecuted.
Well, some people would, because there was the slave, the Fugitive Slave Act. Prosecuted people for helping slaves get away.
But that was just an example, like, of a moral case, maybe.
Yeah, I know. I understand. True, Jason. Yeah. I understand the point of the morality and the legality of issues. Obviously, slavery was a big immoral thing, and there were a lot of people who helped quite a number of slaves escape slavery, which I think is morally right. Obviously, I think is morally right. But what happens when your moral actions also breaks law in a country that believes in the rule of law? There's a clear conflict here.
There is, and I think that's kind of like what James is saying. Sort of, hopefully, the greater weight takes precedent. I hope, and that's if the government lies to you, I can't imagine a worse thing than, because if the government's lying to you, then is anything being is anything intact at that point, right?
Sure.
Once the government is lying to you, it's like everything is off the table, right? I mean, because you can't be sure that any contract is good at that point. So yeah.
Anyways, and not only that, and that same government has the power and authority to classify information where they can hide things very, very deeply. Okay.
Yeah.
And if somebody don't do the moral thing by releasing some of that information or telling us what's going on there, you are left in this government, you're left in this country where you have the government doing all sorts of things that violate your constitutional rights, and you don't even know about it.
Well, speaking of getting your constitutional rights violated, and I'm not 100% sure it applies, because I don't think Assange is an American citizen, but Julian Assange,
he's not.
Yeah, so Julian Assange is in a pretty bad situation with our government right now. He is being, and Jane, maybe you could bring up the visual here. He is being hounded by our government for essentially, I believe it's for espionage, right? Because they're claiming that he essentially participated in getting government secrets exposed to the world, kind of like what Snowden did, except for the fact that Julian Assange didn't actually go in and steal the information. A whistleblower handed him the information, and the information happened to be of actions that our government was taking during a war that it didn't really want our citizens to understand how the government behaves during that war. And we have a video clip of that. And I just want to give you a little bit of warning for anybody who's not aware of the Julian Assange video clip. It is a little bit graphic in the sense it doesn't show, horrifying blood or anything like that, but it does show our government essentially killing people who were non-combatants in a situation, and that is what Julian Assange is being persecuted for. The idea that he told the public the truth about some of our actions overseas. And James, maybe you could roll that clip. It's KOL 3.
For more than 2.5 years, the wire service Reuters has been trying to find out what happened to their 2 staff members on this street in the suburb of New Baghdad. WikiLeaks says this is what happened.
Yep, he's got a weapon too. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18, have 5 to 6 individuals.
This is video.
We got an RPG. All right, we got a guy with
the voice on the tape, presumably a member of the military, says there has been shooting in the area and receives permission to open fire.
When people are labeled as insurgents, are they really insurgents? It seems to be the case that from the scenes in this video, that any person that is not a man and sometimes not a woman is by default labeled as an insurgent.
Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260s.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shoot.
There you can see.
God damn it, Kyle. All right. I hit him. Oh, yeah, look at those dead bastards.
So there you can see the video.
From a distance, you hear the voices on the tape watch as the wounded try to crawl to help. But when help arrives...
Come on, let us shoot. You're engaged. 1-8, engaged. Clear. Come on. Clear. Oh yeah, look at that, right through the windshield.
In this video, I think you see the corruption of pilots and the military by war itself, in particular by the modern nature of aerial war.
So there you have Julian Assange talking about the video clip that came. This is before he had to go into hiding after this, because our government chased him all over the world, and he wound up hiding in an embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy, I believe, in England.
Yes.
Yeah. And then eventually we tried a lot of ways to get him, and finally we did have, I can't remember which country he's currently being held in, but they're getting ready to extradite him to the United States. And what his crime apparently was journalism, because he didn't actually go in and steal this. A whistleblower gave it to him, and he gave it to the public. And that's like what the New York Times does. That's what any newspaper does, and he is being essentially he's had the last 10 years of his life living in exile in little rooms in embassies and in jail. It's absolutely horrifying. But you guys want to jump in on this?
James?
No, go for it, Leon.
Well, I mean, there's no way to describe this other than a horror within a horror. First, we had the horror of this massacre that occurred, and then we have the horror of the government trying to chase down Julian Assange because he released the information, as if we should not have known about this, or if this should have been some secret. This is a damn dirty secret that should never stay, that no one should keep quiet. And anybody who would want to keep this quiet is quite immoral. And that says a lot, unfortunately, about certain sectors of our government, where they try to cover up the dirty work that we do sometimes. Now, I'm not one of those anti-Americans BSs that we have all around, okay? But sometimes our government does do a lot of crap. This is one of those cases. The Julian Assange case is one of those cases where the government is clearly wrong about this, and they are persecuting a man for absolutely no reason. And I didn't say prosecute, I said persecute.
Yeah, and again, it's the silence of the journalistic class that is actually most telling, right? The New York Times should be leading the charge protecting Snowden, and they're not. And I think that's very telling.
Yeah.
Well, I don't. This is an interesting point you're raising. And what is there to gain by any media outlet to not be outraged about what they're trying to do to Snowden? What is
contract with the U.S. government? That's what's to gain. Contracts of all various kinds.
Media outlets looking for contracts.
Yeah. Oh, you don't think the New York Times has contracts with the CIA? It may not be with the CIA directly, Leon. It may be with a shell organization, a shell company that gives them advertising dollars. But yeah, who do you think's paying for all these advertisements? Where do you think? If you want the answers to these questions, you follow the money. And when you have a newspapers and journalistic class that is starving for money and losing audience, they're going to turn to the most solid place of resources they can find, and that is the U.S. government.
Wow. I never thought I know we have always said that the media, especially what we call the mainstream media, is clearly in bed with the government, especially with democratic governments. But I didn't know this had reached the point of money transfers, where the government is actually paying the media to do stuff for them. Well, I mean, this is beyond just left-wing ideology. This is fascism at work.
Well, you know how they do it. They give money to a nonprofit for some social goal, and that money for the nonprofit buys advertising at the New York Times, and everybody knows where the money's come from. Everybody knows whose hand is in the left pocket and whose hand is in the right pocket. Everybody knows. They all knows where it comes from. This is a well-orchestrated machine for a long time. That's nothing. This is just how it's done. Which is why the act, Leon, it's why do you think they're act so much that would appear to be against their interests? Right?
Our invisible hand just pulled the sheet off of the machine there. Let's see what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, I mean, you are saying, James, and I'm not disagreeing with you. Okay, I'm just
the grift is real, Leon. The grift is real.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but you are saying that deep state that we always talk about, we always theorize about, is really deeper than we really think.
Oh yeah, the roots go all throughout the soil. Oh yeah, how many left wing or how many nonprofits get their money from some kind of government grant? So now all these nonprofits who get their money from government grants are now beholden to the government. And so the consequence, that's just the natural consequence of some of these grants, will be to give money to these newspapers and whatnot for advertising. It's all ugly, very, very, very ugly, Leon. It's very, very ugly.
Yeah. Well, certainly one thing is definitely clear, and we've heard Glenn Greenwald and some of these others talk about this, but that some of these reporters literally are just mouthpieces for government agencies. I mean, it's sort of like there is no journalism going on in some of these cases. It's literally their scoop is the government agency calls them and tells them what to say, and they say it. Right? So
why are they willing to do that? Why are journalists willing to do that?
Yeah.
Now, but Jason, though, I mean, we have always talked about this thing as there's an ideological alignment between the government and mainstream media. And as a result, they always end up pushing the government narrative, especially when it's a democratic government. But what James is saying here is something far more insidious.
Yeah, he's saying one step beyond just repeating what they tell him to repeat.
Yeah,
he's saying that they're actually giving them something beyond just the exclusive.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
It's all indirect, so no one sees it except for those who fill out grant applications and understands how the long term.
Yeah.
It's just the natural way these things work, right? Once your organization is dependent on government grants, your organization is dependent on government grants.
Well, and for anybody who's out there watching and they don't quite understand the rot that's going on in journalism, the lack of inquisitiveness, just think about the Nord Stream pipeline story. I mean, here you had an instance of our president literally saying to reporters that we would be sure when they asked him, how we could be sure that we could shut down the Nord Stream pipeline, and Biden assured him, because they said, well, it's not our pipeline. How would it? Oh, don't worry. He said, we can shut it down. He said something to that effect. And then lo and behold, a month or two later after the war starts, the pipeline is blown up. And the only guy reporting on it really is Seymour Hersh, who was an old school journalist, but almost all of these other guys associated with the big papers, there's like no inquisitive nature about, being skeptical of the government story. I mean, the government story was, the Russians, they blew up their own pipeline. I mean, why would they do that? I mean, it's their pipeline. All they have to do is turn a knob and shut it off.
Exactly. But just even though that's a very good example, but I think the more damaging example we saw of this in terms of the media and its interference in our lives, the adverse interference is the Hunter Biden laptop. The people who signed, the 51 persons who signed,
Intel chiefs, all these different Intel spooks like Clapper.
They were all government employees or former employees. They're all part of maybe the same deep state that James is talking about.
Yeah, people like that. And just in case you're not aware of what Leon's talking about, during the Trump-Biden election, there was a scandal about the Hunter Biden laptop story where it had all kinds of embarrassing information about Hunter Biden and potential deals he was involved in with foreign governments and other crimes that he was potentially engaged in. There certainly looks like a lot of it. But the point is that broke just before the election. Yeah. And suddenly the narrative coming out of all of these intelligence chiefs that, by the way, it turned out was requested by Biden's what is that guy now? His Secretary of State or Chief of State? Yeah, Blinken. Yeah. So Anthony Blinken, it turned out he requested this letter. So it wasn't like something that came on its own. He requested them to give him a letter that said this was Russian, disinformation. And sure enough, they all got together and made a letter, said this is Russian disinformation. So it's kind of circular. He asked for a letter from the experts, supposed experts, saying this is Russian disinformation. They give it to him. And then the press just says, oh, see, it's Russian disinformation. There you go. Yeah. And then, of course, nobody bothered to investigate. In fact, they even shut the New York Post access down to some social media as well, which was what Leon was getting at earlier with the Twitter files. Yeah.
But all of these things, even though I'm a little bit skeptical of James, the depth of the deep state as defined by James. When you're seeing all of these things, I just said that Twitter was occupying space. The FBI was occupying space at Twitter. They were in the office of Twitter daily at one point in time. They're not there anymore because of Elon Musk taking over Twitter. So maybe it's not too far of a stretch. It's not too far of a stretch to say what James is saying in terms of money transfers. Maybe they don't go directly, like James have suggested. But this is some bad stuff.
Yeah,
this really is.
They don't have to go directly; they just go indirectly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. True.
It's just like union money goes indirectly, right? It doesn't have to go. It's all the same. It's all the same.
We've talked about a few different cases that are huge. I mean, in the sense of what we're doing in terms of foreign conflicts, how we're essentially blunting information that may help us to get out of foreign conflicts. But even more closer to home is what just happened to us in COVID. And Jane, maybe you could bring up the visual on this. So we don't have a video on this one, but this one is essentially goes back to the Twitter files stuff and all of these other social media companies. And essentially the idea that any voice that was skeptical of the Biden administration's voice on COVID was that they tried to censor. And Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford was one of those voices. And they tried to put together this thing called the Great Barrington Declaration that we talked about on the show, which essentially just was sort of a reasonable approach. It simply said, hey, look, there's different groups of people that are affected by COVID in different ways. Let's not lock everybody down. Let's just, try and help out the old people to stay isolated and let the young people go about their thing. And, we'll try and do what we can. And that's because lockdowns just simply are not going to work. It was what they were proposing. And what, aside from trying to get them stopped with fact checkers and all kinds of other stuff, and granted, these are esteemed scientists. These are not like just some fringe scientists. There was, I believe, a Nobel laureate who signed on to this. And, so these were people from big colleges who thought this. And here in this story, it says it was later revealed that the NIH director, Dr. Francis Collins, called for a swift and devastating takedown of Bhattacharya and his co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, whom Collins dubbed fringe epidemiologists, in an email to Anthony Fauci. So, they were literally essentially orchestrating the media to take these guys down. So to shut down. So this is the government, the top people in our government on COVID, Fauci and Dr. Francis Collins, trying to squelch contradictory information. And they call that the science. What do you guys, it really fries me.
My theory is looking better and better all the time, is what I'm saying.
In this case, Pfizer was the pipeline. Yeah.
That's it. That's all I got on that one.
James, if you're right, I am more scared tonight than I was last night about the future of our great land, because you have government officials paying to supposedly free press, which is constitutionally protected. Government officials paying. I mean, that obviously.
I need to remind you, here in California, our Democrat, they want to directly pay news organizations. They want to directly pay the New York Times and directly pay the San Francisco Chronicle, or directly pay the Sacramento Bee. They want to do that. They actually want to take money from the California budget and give it to these people directly.
To give the right narrative of reality.
To save local journalism, right? To save local journalism for them. That's
as a matter of fact, just yesterday, now that you say that, I just remembered that just yesterday, Adam Schiff, he's running for the Senate. I was talking about he wrote some letter to someone. He have some concerns about the New York Times. Well, the Los Angeles Times is failing right now. They really have some problems. When you go woke, you go broke. And he was talking about, he's so concerned about the same local things he's talking about, James, local newspapers and blah, 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 and all kind of stuff and things like that. But obviously, when a government is concerned about anything, what follows is money to bail them out, right? Money to bail them out. Yeah. So
now it's not even, now they're just going to stop the indirect money, Leon. They're just going to go right straight to giving it right into their pockets. Envelopes full of cash. Why not?
They're going to just say, he has my hand. The Los Angeles Times say he has my hand. And next thing you know, is an envelope full of cash appearing in it.
Here's what cash. Just make sure you say what I want you to say.
Yeah. Just make sure you have the right narrative. Yes.
Yeah, or you don't get your check next month. That's what happens.
Well, and by the way, too, like Project Veritas, they actually have discussions of these internal discussions that they've gotten recorded and are out there of the New York Times discussing essentially their strategies of how they're going to try and get Trump and things like that. That's their coverage. But speaking of that, this brings up one more related story, and I want to bring that in because it brings it home. All these other stories were stories in the past. But we're being, it's not like it just ends and it's the manipulation is just a story in the past. It's ongoing. And, who knows to what degree they're trying to bend our understanding of what's happening out there. And so this is kind of a disturbing story in a way. It's not that it's surprising because MSNBC and CNN have sort of gone off the rails on partisan politics, in the last, and partisan narratives in the last, 10 years or so. But it's absolutely crazy that Trump just had a historic win on Iowa primaries and the Iowa caucuses. He won by over 50%, and they would not play his victory speech, which, that's news. I mean, if somebody looks like they might be the president or might have a shot at being the president, and you're not going to tell the public what they're saying, Jane, maybe you could play visual KOL 5.
At this point in the evening, the projected winner of the Iowa caucuses has just started giving his victory speech. We will keep an eye on that as it happens. We will let you know if there's any news made in that speech, if there's anything noteworthy, something substantive and important. The reason I'm saying this is, of course, there is a reason that we and other news organizations have generally stopped giving an unfiltered live platform to remarks by former President Trump. It is not out of spite. It is not a decision that we relish. It is a decision that we regularly revisit. And honestly, earnestly, it is not an easy decision, but there is a cost to us as a news organization of knowingly broadcasting untrue things. And that is a fundamental truth of our business and who we are. And so his remarks tonight will not air here live. We will monitor them.
Breaking news: MSNBC is against showing untrue things. Who knew?
I think the reason they don't show these things is because their staff can't take it. Their staff would blow a gasket, and they wouldn't be able to work. And so that's why they don't actually show these things. The staff in this newsroom simply couldn't take it. But it is hilarious that MSNBC, of all places, is talking about not airing untrue things. How many untrue things they have aired over the last few years. It's amazing.
These people have Joy Reid working for them. They have Rachel Maddow working for them, and they have Chris Hayes working for them. Between the three of them, you could not recognize the America that we supposedly living in, or the America that we supposedly going to if Donald Trump becomes president. You would not be able to recognize it. These people are totally insane. They talk about this Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, MSNBC does show that this thing is real. It is real. These people, I'm not joking, Jason, I am not joking. These people need treatment. This is some sick stuff that's going on. What is there to be so afraid of Donald Trump? Or if he says something, Donald Trump is a politician. So politicians don't lie. So Joe Biden is always the truth teller. He's always out there. I'm sure they never refuse to show anything about Joe Biden. So what Joe Biden is this great truth teller. The man sometimes doesn't even know what day of the week it is. So it's a lie when he says today is Monday and when it's actually Thursday. And don't you put it on you put that on your news? How does that work? No, how does it work? Or do you
how can you say that about somebody who claims they marched with Mandela?
This man said he was honored. He was honored to be arrested to go and try and visit Nancy Mandela. Really, Joe? He said he traveled how many millions of miles on the Amtrak train, and he used to talk to this guy every day, and he was talking to him about 20 years after the guy died or some kind of ridiculous thing like that. And they play all of these things. That was, you didn't have a decision about truth telling at that time. You didn't revisit that one. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you for letting us know, Rachel. And Rachel Maddow, of all people, could sit on TV and tell us that with a straight face. God help us in this country, yes, really.
Yeah, I wonder if she'll tell us the truth about Eric Snowden and Julian Assange.
Yeah. Which they seem to be oddly silent on.
Well, they're oddly silent about a lot of things, including Hunter Biden's laptop. They're oddly silent about it.
Well, this is the thing that kills me the most, though, is if somebody is, let's say you did have a president who you think is lying to the public, wouldn't you want to cover that? Isn't that news?
Yeah.
I mean, they're claiming he's lying to the public, and then they're saying, but don't look. We're not going to show you, but we'll tell you if we saw anything. Don't worry about it.
You have 24 hours of programming to counter it, but it's too afraid, but they can't show a 20-minute speech.
Yeah.
They've got 23
Absolutely.
hours and 40 minutes to counter his 20-minute speech, but they can't do that. They somehow not competent enough to do that.
Our journalism is I tell you, they're trying to squeeze themselves into a 4-letter word. I don't know how they're going to do it, but they're trying really hard. But it's anyway. We're getting near the end of the show, and so let me just bring up for our Knucklehead Noise Patrol. This is kind of a funny clip that relates to all this stuff, and we're talking about the way the government is trying to censor what we're hearing that's constantly. And one of the things that came out about, during the Twitter files and all this other stuff is the government literally came out and overtly tried to tell us that they would tell us what information was true and what wasn't, which is kind of the job of the media. That's been the traditional job, to be skeptical of whatever the government says. But now they're telling us that don't worry your pretty little heads about it, media, people. We will tell you what's true.
Yes,
and so
we'll take care.
Well, and so our Department of Homeland Security and James, maybe I can get the visual of this up. They literally tried to bring an Orwellian Ministry of Truth. They called it a disinformation board. But essentially, we're talking about a Ministry of Truth. They will don't worry your pretty little heads about it, journalists. We will tell you what's true and what's not. And so they what tanked it, the craziest thing of all, is how crazy the person was that they tried to make the head of that. If they hadn't picked such a lunatic, we might actually have a Ministry of Truth right now, which is the real disturbing thing. James, can you play the visual? We're going to show you what this woman was putting online, who was supposedly the person who could tell us all what was true and what wasn't true, and she would tell us all that.
Huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared that intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo, and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote. Oh, information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origin seems slightly less atrocious.
Wow.
Well, what I do have to say, Jason, is it takes one to know one. The reason they know all these things is because they're so practiced at it. I was going to say good at it, but because they're not. But they're practiced at it. They're practiced at it.
Yeah. Well, she's certainly practicing her messaging on it. Put it all to song.
The thing that is so disturbing about these people. Look at the nice name they give it. It is the Disinformation Governance Board, okay? And they're going to decide for us what is disinformation and what is not. So this organization, this Disinformation Governance Board, was supposed to be headed by this crazy woman, this insane individual, and they were going to be underneath the Department of Homeland Security, who is headed by a man known as Alejandro Mayorkas, who is the worst liar we have had in this country. Mayorkas
Oh, I was just going to say, he's been telling us our borders are secure while Mayor Adams is telling us their secure borders are destroying New York City.
Exactly. You took the words out of my mouth, okay? People are pouring across the southern border. Mayors are complaining that their cities are being destroyed. But Mayorkas is telling us the border is secure. Don't worry about it. But you know what's ironic about this? The Biden administration never told us that's disinformation. Notice, they never said that was disinformation. And they're still telling us the border is secure.
Well, they're waiting for Jankowicz to make a song up.
I guess.
Put it to music so it makes it easy for the propaganda mill. But the one good news thing about the story, and Jane, maybe you could bring this up. At least this is Homeland Security's webpage that after that whole debacle, that was a bridge too far, which amazes me. I didn't know there were any bridges too far at this point, but that was a bridge too far. And so they scrapped it. That was, they even had some Democrats complaining, didn't I read about this in 1984? It's like,
they're just putting it on the shelf, Jason. They'll bring it back with a different name. Just like Leon says, they'll come up with a cushier sounding name, a nice softer sounding name, and they'll bring it right back.
Of course. Yes.
Especially if Biden wins again.
And that was the scary thing, though, about this, is that was the overt attempt to do it. The fact that what we saw in the Twitter files is that they were doing it covertly before this overt thing. But the fact that it almost happened overtly is just mind-boggling, that they would admit that that's what they're trying to do, and they saw no
They're so
issues.
arrogant that they'll do it, that they thought they could do it in the open.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're at the end of the show, and so I wanted to thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you've seen some of the dangers of misinformation. I mean, we've focused on that. I mean, the censorship issue and the idea that the government will tell you what the truth is and what is disinformation and what isn't disinformation. I mean, this is something that, like all things, liberty equals responsibility. And, if you give up your responsibility on trying to figure out for yourself what's true and what's not, trying to weigh your sources and everything else, if you give up too much of that, eventually you're going to wind up giving your liberty away with that responsibility. Yeah. So, definitely, this is information wars. That's the biggest probably danger that we're in right now. And it's funny too, because the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and we'll talk about them in a future talk. They just had their recent annual meeting, but they actually said that their number one concern was disinformation or misinformation. I can't remember which they're calling it today. They change the words all the time, but that was the thing. They want to be able to control the narrative, like what they were trying to do in this Homeland Security. That was their big thing, and that's the whole ball of wax, people. So keep your antennas up. But until the next time, think about what you can do in your community, because I tell you, it's going to take all of us to keep our liberty. I mean, we all have to play a role if we don't want to go down this crazy clown world path. But you can check out more of our shows on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and Facebook. So go check those out, and you can see more interesting conversations we've had with people fighting for liberty around the country. And until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.